Hello everybody and welcome. Alias coming at you today with some more Noita. We're going to be talking about stunlocking. So, stunlocking is a really common problem in Noita. Everyone's had to deal with it in one way or another, whether it's a melee enemy just knocking you around or if it's a group of Hisi firing upon you. It just ends up happening. So I'm going to go ahead and give a couple tips and tricks on how to deal with stunlocking. So the first most important thing to know is when you are being stunlocked in Noita, what is going on is you are being knocked into the air with a small amount of momentum, and until you touch the ground, you will not regain your momentum, or you will not regain your control again. So basically what you want to do is find a way to be touching the ground as quickly as possible again. It doesn't have to be ground, it could be any 2 or 3 pixels. So for example, if you get hit and you fall into some water, you will immediately regain control. If there's like a waterfall and there's like 10 pixels and you touch it as you're flying through the air because a sniper shot you on level 3, you will regain your aerial mobility, which is really good news. Also, if you're on the ground and you get hit, you are getting slightly pulled off of the ground depending on the angle you get hit at. So that's another really important thing to note. So there are lots of little caveats to it. If you're on the side of a hill and the hill is kind of to your back and you get shot, if you hold toward the enemy, you'll get knocked in the air. If you hold away from the enemy, you'll keep full control. So there's definitely like opposing forces at work here. At the very start of a hit, you sort of have a tiny bit of influence. So for example, if you're walking toward an enemy, you're going to resist the knockback more than if you were walking away. It's much more important to go with a hit rather than to try and resist and go into the hit. There are very few enemies in this game who will be able to easily stunlock you as long as you keep moving. That's the main thing. But if you're walking toward a hail of bullets, it's gonna be pretty nasty for you. And as for melee enemies, I mean, it's as simple as just keep distance. We'll go ahead and go over a couple of scenarios now. So there's ranged ground, which I've already kind of gone over. Basically, if you're on the ground against ranged enemies, you want to be making space. I mean, regardless of the situation, you want to be making space. I personally find the air is the safest place to be against enemies, even though if you get hit, you're stun-locked for longer. It's much harder for the enemy to hit you when you have that extra axis of movement, because if you're grounded, you can only go up, left, or right. When you're in the air, you can go up, down, left, right, which is a whole extra direction to play around with. It helps a lot for dodging. That said, if you're in a jam and there's a bunch of enemies attacking you, let's say you've already been hit once and you've landed on the ground, your goal now is just to make distance. So walk in the opposite direction of the enemy, either bunny hop, because that is a little bit faster, or just try to make space. If there's a weaker enemy that is stun-locking you, focus them first over any of the heavy hitters. That's a really common mistake I see, is people go after the lobber Hisi first rather than the quicker gunner Hisi. The gunner Hisi are far more deadly because they're the ones that are going to lock you down for the lobber Hisi to hit you in the first place. And other than that, you know, ground is pretty simple. If you have a tablet, you can place the tablet in between you and the enemy, and if they're a grounded enemy, then they'll have a much harder time shooting you. That's a really common strategy that I use against Robocop in the Fungal Caverns on level 2. He's a very dangerous enemy, but making a wall with the tablet is a great way of doing that. We will be going over the tablet more in depth here in a moment, but it is something that you should always have on you if, well, pretty much in every scenario. It can one-shot kill enemies. It can prevent explosions from hitting you. It can prevent any... It just does it all. It's crazy. Anyway, let's get on to the next stage. So, air. We're going to be talking about ranged in the air. Ranged in the air, there are multiple different ways of dealing with a ranged enemy while you're in the air. Obviously, the first thing that you should be doing is dodging. Let's say you fail a dodge. There are 2 different things you can do. So, when you are hit in the air, you are going to go into a free fall under normal circumstances. Once you touch 2 or 3 pixels again, that's when you can move again. There are ways of getting around this. If you are touching a wall as you get hit, you will be able to immediately regain control. It doesn't work on ceilings very often unless the ceiling has a little bit of wall attached to it. It requires a little bit of finesse to figure out exactly how it works. But in time, you'll realize. If you're going to take a hit, and you know you're going to take the hit, you can hug a wall and regain your flight to try and get to a higher location. Otherwise, it's fine to just sometimes fall to the ground and recover in that position. So with that knowledge, you can do the same thing with a tablet, actually. If, for example, you were shot and you got sent flying, you could throw that tablet at your feet to make it so you can regain flight. I've used this trick pretty regularly when I'm exploring the sky area, the sky biomes. It's really, really handy for preventing you from free falling forever. You can also use it to prevent you from falling into dangerous liquids and that sort of thing. And you can even pick up your tablet as you put it at your feet, so that way you never lose it. It's a little bit of an advanced trick, but if you set up a hotkey for it, it can be a really handy trick, especially if you're not able to react in time for this next trick, which I'm about to show you. So there is maybe around it's a 1 to 3 frame trick. I'm gonna go ahead and show it on screen here. This is a very, very advanced technique that I have not mastered myself yet, but I know that it is consistent. It can be done consistently because I've managed to incorporate it into my regular play. A lot of people note that, it's like, oh, why don't you ever get stun locked? This is going to be the reason why. So, much like how there is a weird little hidden mechanic based around parrying you can do with melee enemies, when you're in the air and you get hit by a projectile, you have about a 3 frame window, 1 to 3 frames, where you can let go of your levitation and then reactivate your levitation, and it's almost like you jump off of the projectile. And I haven't come up with a name for it yet. We'll go ahead and make that a community decision. But this is so much more useful for getting out of stun locks than just about everything else, because it can be used in, I would say, well over half of scenarios. The only times you cannot pull this off is if a bullet is moving too fast, or if there are a ton of shots hitting you all at the same time. So if you're dealing with like a rapid fire group of enemies, it's going to be really hard. But if you only get hit by one of the shots, which is what often happens when you are successfully dodging, you get hit by a single shot, this is how you shake it off, and it works fantastically well. As for the faster shots, the big deal is to just make sure that if you're in the air, you have a wall that you will smash into, so that way you can recover your flight that way. That can work very, very well. So between those two, you pretty much got everything covered for potential stun locks in the air. The tablet can obviously be used if there is no wall. It's a decent substitute if you're fast. So this is the epitome of avoiding stun locking. Alright, now let's go ahead and carry on to the next section. Melee stun locking tends to be a lot more linear than ranged stun locking. There's a couple of different situations you can find yourself in where you'll be stun locked by a melee based enemy. Situation 1 is there is a singular melee based enemy who manages to lunge into you repeatedly, and that's a really easy way to get stun locked. The best way you can deal with that is make sure you know the lunge distance of the enemy. That basically it's just enemy pattern recognition at that point. However, there is a really cool trick that you can do against enemy lunges of any kind. If you throw out your leg, if you do a kick, and you make contact with the enemy while they are hitting you with a melee attack, you have a pretty good chance of pulling off what I call a parry. And parries will block 100% of the melee damage, as well as return a flat amount of damage onto the enemy. This can be really handy when you think you're going to get hit, and you just throw out the leg. And like you lose nothing for kicking, so you might as well do it if you think you're going to get hit by a melee enemy. So it's a pretty linear little trick, but that's basically the best thing that you can do. If you have a tablet, you can also throw that at the enemy as well. And since you're kicking anyway, you might end up getting a tablet kick, and tablet kicks can one-shot kill anything in the game, just about. So that can be a really handy trick. Other than that, more importantly, I would just make sure to keep your distance, and when you're getting hit by a melee enemy, that means that you probably screwed up somewhere along the line. Ranged enemies, you're going to get hit anyway. It just happens. No matter how good you are, you'll get hit by a ranged enemy. But with melee enemies, it's really simple. Like, if you come around a corner too fast and the fog of war doesn't go away in time, you'll get ambushed. If you don't properly clear above you, an enemy can drop down on top of you. It's all that sort of thing. So when it comes to melee enemies, I would say that it's as simple as making sure you're aware of your general environment and keeping a healthy distance. Also, against a lot of melee enemies, if you're in a pinch, you can dive into water, or any sort of liquid for that matter, and as long as it's more than your character deep, most enemies will not be able to follow you into that water to continue attacking. However, note, if an enemy manages to do a lunging attack, and they fall into a liquid, they can actually reset their lunging attack, and they can continually spam it. So you gotta make sure that you kill the enemies pretty quickly if you go for that method. However, it is occasionally quite handy, so that's all I can really say about melee stun locking. Learn to time your parries, keep your distance, and you will not have any trouble with melee enemies. So that is going to be all for that little section. Alright. With all those tips and tricks combined, you should have a much easier time in Noita avoiding stun locking. So with that, thank you very much for watching. Feel free to hit that subscription button. Leave a comment down below if I missed anything. There is a lot of complexity to this game, and I tried to simplify it as much as possible when it comes to this. I had several other takes where it was just a whole lot of rambling, and when I was doing that, I felt that I needed to simplify it down. So if you felt I missed anything important, please let me know. I will make sure I keep everyone up to date. And if you're interested in learning from me live, or just find my content entertaining, please drop on by over to my Twitch stream. I stream live pretty regularly at AliasBot. I'll make sure there's a link in the description down below. Thank you all very much for watching, and have a wonderful rest of your day.